Once again, welcome everybody to the Accessibility and Disability Policy webinar series today, February 16th, 2019, with Shemica Allen of Personalized Learning Solutions. Shemica, it's all yours. Thank you for joining us today.
Okay, Randy, thank you. So a little bit about myself. I am a former special ed teacher and administrator. And now I own my company called Personalized Learning Solutions. So I help parents navigate the special ed process and also the 504 process, mostly here in Dallas-Fort Worth. But I do also have some clients in the Austin and the Houston area. So I will travel to those areas, but most of my clients are here. So today's presentation, we're going to highlight two key parts of the IEP, the present levels, and then how do you take that present levels and how do you write correct, measurable annual goals for your child. So we'll go. So today's presentation objectives, it says you're going to learn why the present levels, or I'll refer to it as the PLAAFP, is the cornerstone and the baseline for creating a high quality IEP. You're going to learn the components. We're going to review really quick the components of the PLAAFP today. And then we're also going to talk about how to use the PLAAFP to create measurable annual goals. And then in talking about the measurable annual goals, we're going to learn there's components. There's 4 components to the measurable standards-based goals and objectives. So we're going to start with a review of the different parts of the IEP. And like I said, today's presentation is focusing only on major 2, the present levels and the measurable annual goals. So real quick, we're going to talk about, there are, I think it's 12 sections that you should see in your IEP. As like I said before, the point of this presentation is to focus on the PLAAFP and the goals, but I'm going to review the components that you should see in an IEP. So the first thing is the statement of the present levels. That is what the major of the presentation today. It says the present levels is and functional. It says the present levels is the academic and functional performance of your child with disability. This data can come from several sources in the present level. It can come from state assessments. It can come from the FIE. It can come from classroom assessments. It can come from a reevaluation. It's information from the teachers, the service providers, and it's also information from you as the parent can be included. This information also should not be opinionated. The information in the PLAAFP should be very data driven. So it should not include statements and things such as Johnny is a hard worker or Johnny is lazy. It needs to be very data driven. So also in the PLAAFP, you want to know where the sources of the data came from. What testing did it come from? If it's a norm reference testing, if it's just a data gathering document that the teachers use in the classroom, if it's iStation testing. You also want to know the data, but you want to know where the data came from. So in the PLAAFP, you are looking at functional and academic. You can also talk about what accommodations are working in the PLAAFP, what accommodations are not working in the PLAAFP. That's section 1. And the reason why it's number 1 is because it's the most important part of the IEP. The second section of your component of an IEP is the statement of eligibility. This is the 13 disabilities. So under IDEA, a student with a disability can qualify for special ed services if they have one of these 13 disabilities listed here. And so, you know, we have autism, we have intellectual disability, you have multiple disabilities, you have orthopedic impairment, deaf blindness. So these are the 13 disabilities that a student can receive. If they have one of these disabilities, they can receive special education services. So the next component is the other major part that we're going to talk about today is a statement of measurable goals. You can also have objectives. So you can have the goals, then you can have objectives that are broken down into short-term objectives and benchmarks. The goals they can be academic and functional. The most important part is they have to be measurable because you have to be able to measure progress and show where the student has started and where they ended. So you can have academic, you can have functional, you can have behavioral goals. Okay, but the goals are based on the present levels, and we're going to go through how do you get the goals from the present levels. The fourth component of the IEP is how are you going to measure progress? The IEP must state how the child's progress will be measured and how the parents will be informed. So that is you getting your progress reports. IEP progress reports should go home every time regular general ed progress report cards go home. So when your student gets their regular report card, you should sometime a week later, about the same time, you should be getting a progress report on your child's IEP goals and objectives. The next component of the IEP is where they talk about any related services, supplementary aids that are going to be provided to your child. These are things that could be OT, PT. This could also include training and professional development for the staff. Sometimes parents don't know that teachers and paraprofessionals can receive training and professional development as part of the student's IEP. So this is any supplementary aids or services in this section. The next section that you're probably very familiar with is program modifications, where you have modifications to the content, to the TEKS, or you have the students' accommodations. So again, this is another major section. We're not going to talk about this section today, but accommodations can be visual, auditory. You can have accommodations for executive functioning, timing, scheduling. Modifications, a modification is when you change what a student is going to learn. So here in Texas, our curriculum is the TEKS. So when you have a modification to the TEKS, that's a modification. Accommodation are things that put the student on a level playing field. So then a modification changes what they're supposed to learn. You will see in your IEP, you have what they call a statement of participation with non-disabled children. The IEP must explain the extent, if any, to which the child will not participate with non-disabled children in the regular class and other school activities. All right. I think we have about 5 more components. The next component is your state testing. So what your student is going to be taking and what accommodations they're receiving on the state testing. Some of these state testing accommodations will be very similar to your classroom accommodation. As a matter of fact, a student needs to be receiving the classroom accommodation in the classroom to receive it for state accommodation. You do state testing. A student must regularly be using that accommodation in the classroom to use it on state assessments. The next, so this is really basically your schedule of services. When will services start? When will they end? Where will they be provided? So will it be in the general education classroom? Will it be in the special education classroom? So this is your dates of your IEP basically. When you're talking about like speech therapy and occupational therapy, this also relates to how many times a week, how many minutes, or how many times a grading period they're receiving that service. So this is basically the beginning, frequency, and location and duration of your services. That's your schedule of services page in your IEP. This next section only applies to when a student starts at the age of 14. To start including a statement of transition services and needs in an IEP. This is when we're going to talk about and start working with the student on what they want to do in their life after high school. So it says no later than a child's 16th birthday, then a transition plan must be included in the IEP. So you will have start having transition goals. They will meet with your child and go through, and you will do transition assessments. These transition goals and services can be related to training they may need, education, and employment. They will also take into account your child's likes and dislikes. This is where a person like a vocational adjustment coordinator or a transition specialist might speak to you and your child about their likes, their dislikes. What do you have for their plans after high school? This is where some of the agencies come into place here, like MHMR or LifePath. That's when they maybe start coming to your ARD. A member from that agency might start coming to your ARD meetings as you talk about transition. So you really can start talking about it at age 14, but at age 16, you have to start including post-secondary goals in your IEP. And then the last two sections, this again, the number 11 will only apply at the age of majority. So this is when a student gets ready to turn 18, they now become the adult student in the ARD meeting, and when it comes to signing signature at the end of the IEP or on the signature page. This is also where you can discuss, where we will talk about if a student needs guardianship. So, but that's at the age of 18. It's called when a student reaches the age of majority. And then the last section of the IEP that you will see a component is when they talk about placement in the least restrictive environment. So there will be a statement they'll read somewhere in the R that talks about how your child is being educated in the least restrictive environment. But by law, your child has to be educated. Can their IEP be met in their least restrictive environment? That means sometimes that's in the general education setting. Sometimes that might be in a resource setting. And sometimes for some students, that's in a self-contained classroom. But it's in the least restrictive environment for that child. So I know that was really quick, but those are the 12 components by law, by federal law, that your IEP should have. We're going to focus today on 2, which was number 1, the present levels, and the measurable annual goals. So,
Shemica, I'm going to pop in every now and then, so you might see my video come on. That means we have a question, and I'm not sure where you want to answer this, but I just want to make you aware.
okay.
It says, how do parents know or define the IEP objectives are reasonably calculated based on the student's profile? For example, should the IEP goal set at least 1 or 2 levels higher than the STAR or the STAR Alt 2 assessment level that the student previously or scored previously? So that you'll probably get into that. So if you want to hold off, that's okay. But I want to make sure you know that there is a question.
Okay, I want to say one thing about that. The goals and objectives are not based on the STAR and the alt or they're based on your child's present levels. So when we get into this, they're not based on the TEKS, they're not based on the essence statements. We try to line goals and objectives up with TEKS and essence statements, like for STAR Alt 2, but your goals and objectives are based on your child's present levels. It's based on what they are doing academically, functional, and behavior, where they are academically, functional, and behavior. And it's not where we all want them to be on grade level, and we want them to have access to grade level, the curriculum, grade level, where they're at, if they're in the third grade reading, but your goals and objectives are written on where the student is performing academic, or if they have to have behavioral or adaptive objectives. So I'll be able to answer that more when we get into talking about, but your goals and objectives are not based on TEKS and STAR Alt. It's based on how your student is performing at that time.
Very good. Thank you, Shemica.
Yeah, you're welcome. So these are, I can hit the link, it'll take it to this is a federal, the components of your IEP are just not something that a school district decides what goes in and they can eliminate different pieces. Per law, there's a definition individualized education program, and it's on the IDA website, and it's also on the electronic code of federal regulations. So all of these components that I just went over, they are in the federal law in the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, and they must be included in your IEP. A school district can just decide to leave one of the components off. If they are violating the federal law. So all 12 of these components must be in your child's IEP from year to year. So I like this little chart here. So if you look at it, the biggest piece on the screen is developing the PLAAFP statement, because as we go into the next couple of slides, you'll see the PLAAFP is the most important part of the IEP. From the PLAAFP, you get your goals and objectives. You get your accommodations. You get any services your child may need. So if the PLAAFP is not well developed, the rest of your IEP will not be well developed. So that's why I said when I talked about it as the first component of the IEP, it needs to be data driven. It does not need to be opinionated. It has to, like I said, can include different data sources, your FIE, iStation testing, DRA testing, any testing the school does, any sources of data. It can also include observations from the teacher, and then it can include information from you. But you want it to be very data driven, because you're going to use that to develop appropriate goals and objectives and accommodations and services for your child. As you can see, you develop the PLAAFP first, and you look at general education curriculum, look at your child's current skills and knowledge, look at where their deficits are, they're weak. That's their area of needs. That's where you're going to write your goals from. That's where your goals are going to come from. You're going to use your students' strengths, your child's strengths, and then you're going to look at their areas of need. I call them their weaknesses, their deficits, and that's where your goals come from. And you write your measurable goals. So that's the reason why the PLAAFP section of this chart is so big, because you look at so many different data sources when you're developing the PLAAFP. And then from that PLAAFP, you look at what your student is doing well, and then what their areas of instructional need are. Not only instructional need, it could be functional and it could be behavioral needs, and you write goals based on that need. Again, with these, once you write these goals must be goals that can be, a student can make progress on and achieve within an ARD year. So in a calendar year. So you don't want the goals to be too high, and then you also don't want the goals to be too low. You don't want to write a goal and a student achieve it in a few weeks. Then you'll have to go back to ARD meeting and write new goals. But you also don't want goals that are too high or too hard for a student. Right, so I have that there, and I have PLAAFP in the star because I keep repeating it and I say it. The PLAAFP is your star of your IEP. So if you remember, when you go into your ARD meeting, the first thing you talk about and you get update on is your child's progress. That's the reason why you do that. You get that update first, because it's the most important part of the IEP. It is, as I say, it is the star.
How should the needs be collected for the PLAAFP? We have a question. How should the needs be collected?
You mean the data?
The question says needs, so maybe that's what they're talking about, the data.
Well, once the data can come, the needs can come from when you look at the data, how they're doing in the classroom. It can be classroom grades. It can be how they did on their state assessment, which objectives on their state assessment they didn't do well. It can be what the teacher sees in the classroom, deficits they see. It can be, you can get your needs, you can see from a student's work samples. So here it says the PLAAFP is the starting point. It is the foundation, it is the star. I don't know how much I can incorporate and stress that this is the most important part of your IEP. The ARD committee must determine the student's present levels before you can do appropriate goals, accommodations, modifications, or placement. Before you do any of the other parts of the IEP, the PLAAFP has to be written and determined. Present levels, progress must be discussed. You cannot get into the other sections of the IEP, components of the IEP, without having the present levels done first. Oh, I'm sorry. So as I say this, and I tell my clients this all the time, the PLAAFP is the story about your child. So if you move from, you have to move to a new school, the first thing is going to read about a student with a disability, a special ed student. That PLAAFP is the first thing they're going to read. That's the story of your child. So if you move if you move to a new district, or you move from out of state, the first story they're going to get about your child is the PLAAFP. So it's a description of the current evaluation and performance. It's a discussion of your child's strengths and needs. And it also explains how their disability impacts them in the general education classroom. And again, this comes from a variety of sources. There's no law on what the sources are. It's just it needs to come from a variety of sources. So like I said, it can come from the current FIE. It can come from their state assessment results. It can come from classroom tests. It can come from homework assignments. It can come from work samples. It can come from teacher observations. And the key is a variety of data sources that tells your student's story. Another thing that the PLAAFP does is it identifies and it prioritizes the strengths and needs of your student. So from writing the PLAAFP, when I get an IEP and I get a new client or existing client and we're getting ready for annual ARD, and I look back at the PLAAFP, from reading that PLAAFP, I can tell what the student's strengths are and I can tell what their needs are. That's both academic, functional, and behavior. You can also have attendance data put in the PLAAFP. There's performance on district and state assessments. There can also be discipline data in the PLAAFP. Information from related services is in the PLAAFP too. Your OT, your occupational therapy, your PT, your physical therapy, your speech therapy, all of that is data that can be included in the PLAAFP. The PLAAFP is when you start a new IEP and you get your PLAAFP, that's your student's current baseline. That's why it's so important that it is data driven, because you're using it to develop an appropriate plan. It also explains how the disability impacts the student's participation in general education curriculum. A lot of districts leave that out. When I go to ARDs with my clients, I'm a stickler that's in the IEP, in the PLAAFP. And when we get to looking at examples of the PLAAFP, I'll give you some examples of that. They need to explain how the child's student's disability impacts their access to the general education curriculum. Usually districts and leave that out, but it's in the federal law. It's a component of a piece of the PLAAFP, how their disability impacts their access to the general education curriculum. Also, the PLAAFP is a description of the current skills. Okay, it should contain measurable, and I keep saying this, baseline data, okay, because that baseline data is a connection to the rest of your IEP. It's the connection to your accommodations. It's a connection to your goals. It's a connection to the services on your schedule of services page. And it's also a connection to the placement. The reason why I keep emphasizing how important that you have a well-developed PLAAFP that comes from a variety of sources. So again, this is from the Code of Federal Regulations. This is the federal requirements for an individualized education program. Student states the IEP must include a statement of the child's present levels of his academic achievement and functional performance, including how the child's disability affects the child's involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. It's the same, so that's the TEATS. They have to explain how your child's disability impacts his progress in the TEATS. That is our curriculum here in the state of Texas. This is Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. And then for preschool children as appropriate, how the disability affects the child's participation in appropriate activities. So when a school district leaves that out of your IEP, they are violating the federal law.
We have another question, Shemica. What if the school's PLAAFP and the parent's PLAAFP are different? Let's say that the parent disagree with the PLAAFP. What are the appropriate actions that the parent should take, and should the parent request an IEE or of the PLAAFP? May I have the official name of the IEE and PLAAFP?
Okay, IEE is Independent Educational Evaluation.
But can the I don't know, can the parent ask for that information? And
no, you cannot get an IEE for PLAAFP. PLAAFP stands for present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. This is the data on your child. So an IEE is for testing, where you want to get cognitive or achievement testing, or you're looking at to get testing for occupational therapy services, physical therapy services. An IEE is an evaluation. The present levels of academic achievement and functional performance is the story of your child at that time, what they've accomplished over the school year, where they are functioning academically, functional level, and behavior. So when you go to an ARD meeting, the IEP is a working copy. It's a draft. So when that PLAAFP comes and the school presents you with the PLAAFP, it's still a draft. Things can be added and taken out of the PLAAFP. So as the committee, if there's something in the PLAAFP you don't like as a parent, you let the committee know, and that's where it's a working document, and you work and you discuss things that you want taken out, or you want things included in the PLAAFP. Information from the parent is just as an important part of the PLAAFP as the information from the student. From the school. So I had that happen. I had a client in Keller ISD, and she did not like some of the statements that were made in the PLAAFP about her son concerning his work on time on task and things like that. So during the ARD committee, because that IEP is a working document, that IEP is not finalized until those signatures are done. So if there's something you don't like in the IEP, you sit there as a committee and you work it out. So things can be eliminated. Just because a school presents a PLAAFP to you, that's still a draft. That's a draft. All right, so I made this checklist, and I use it personally myself when I'm looking at IEPs. This is the components that you should see, kind of a quick checklist for what's in the IEP. So the data, it's a review of assessment line data. We're within the past year. We're not looking at data from 2 years ago. You're looking at data from within the past year. So it's current form, test grades, homework, classroom assignments, course grades, standardized testing, norm reference or criterion reference, teaching. It can also be on the current IEP goals. It can also be what accommodations are currently working, what accommodations are not working. That's all the academic performance. So now if you have a student you need to talk about their functional performance, it is maybe how they're doing on their communication skills, how they're doing growth skills, any functional skills. It could be observation notes again from service providers. So you have data, functional. Data can also be behavior. If you have a student who has some behavior issues and you're talking about time on task, or you're talking about how many behavior have, and you have data tracking data. So you can have academic data, functional data, and behavioral data in your PLAAFP. So then now you have the data. So next is a description. You want to talk about in the PLAAFP. You can talk about which goals, for the IEP goals, the student met. You can talk about which ones they didn't meet. Were there parts of the goals the student did better on than others? These is for both functional and academic goals. So in the PLAAFP, you can talk about the goals that they met. You can also talk about the goals they didn't meet. Same thing, like I said, I repeated with the accommodations. You can talk about which accommodations work well for the student, and which accommodations did not work well. So that's the data, and then you have a description for the PLAAFP. So the next, we'll talk about need. What actions needs to take place in order to assist the student to access the general curriculum? This is what I call the deficits. So you have their strengths, and then you have their weaknesses. So the needs are what basically I say their deficits. That's what you're going to write your IEP goals on. It says determines the goals that will be structured and developed to improve the student's academic performance. We got another question?
Yes, ma'am. My child has an A in math, but is failing district level tests. Should this be added to the PLAAFP?
Yes, it can be. You can, because classroom grades can be put in the PLAAFP, but you can also talk about that they're failing the district level assessments, and you say district or state assessments, Randy?
She said district.
And on their district assessments, the district assessments also the students are assessed on the different TEKS and objectives. If you ask the teacher to look at those district assessments, you can also get data that shows which TEKS and objectives they are not performing well on. District assessments are just like the STAR test. They test the TEKS. So they're going to test different objectives in the TEAC. So you can look at that data from the district assessment, say for math, and it's fractions, and they got 0 out of 2 problems correct. That means your child has a deficit with fractions. So from that district assessment, that's the kind of information you can get to put in the PLAAFP. You can look at what TEAC's objectives were tested on that district assessment, and you can look at how many questions the child got right or wrong, and you can see where their deficits are right there. Those deficits is information for your PLAAFP, and some of those deficits can become goals and objectives.
There's somebody actually put something in the chat box, so I didn't see it until now because it wasn't in the Q&A box. But
Okay.
the comment is, so the PLAAFP is not supposed to have the results of the school evaluation, that's a question, in it. Our son's PLAAFP has the evaluation results in the PLAAFP that states he is cognitively deficient, whereas the developmental pediatrician and previous IEP assessment shows otherwise.
You get information from the evaluations in the PLAAFP. You get a copy of the full individual evaluation. You get the full copy. Pieces of an FIE can be included in the PLAAFP, but the entire FIE should not just be transcribed back into the PLAAFP. When you get a new evaluation, the art committee goes over the evaluation. If there's pertinent pieces of the PLAAFP that support some of the strengths and weaknesses that a school district is using, they might pick and choose different pieces of the PLAAFP to different pieces of the FIE to reiterate in the PLAAFP, but you should not just take the entire PLAAFP, should not take the entire FIE and put it back in the PLAAFP. The FIE is a standalone document alone, and FIE is full individual evaluation.
Thank you.
Okay. I hope that answered the question. So right here on the PLAAFP checklist, we've talked about the data that can be in the PLAAFP. Then the goals and objectives that you can talk about, the description in the PLAAFP. Then we talk about the need. So by the time you get all that information, you're starting to get a picture. You begin to see their strengths and you begin to see their weaknesses. You use those strengths to develop goals to work on their weaknesses. And I say that, for instance, if a student can do single-digit addition, and that's a strength, you want to use that strength and write a goal takes them, and maybe they're going to double-digit addition. So that's where you use a strength and you take it and you push it into a new goal. So you want to use the fact that they can do addition and they can do single-digit addition, and you want to keep advancing their math skills. So now we're going to work on double-digit addition. So that's how you use a strength and you make it into working on a new concept. All right, so we have needs continue. Also look at in the PLAAFP, you can also put in there, maybe there's a need for any kind of therapies, whether it's OT therapy, it's physical therapy. You also look at specialized instruction, related services. I said that before. What accommodations are working? What accommodations are not working? You can also talk about in the PLAAFP if curriculum is being modified. If they're going to have modified curriculum in reading, like they're going to not be expected to learn everything, say 3rd grade reading. Some of the TEACs are going to be modified. That can be explained in the PLAAFP. You also can look at, the PLAAFP can also talk, so discuss future old goals and objectives. You can talk about maybe the need for future. The goals and objectives need to be broken down into, the goals need to be broken down into 2 objectives, short-term benchmarks and objectives. We'll talk about those, and then you might have 2 or 3 objectives underneath that. All of that can be discussed in the PLAAFP. And then again, you can also talk about in the PLAAFP, describe the methods that will be used to collect the data. When you're talking about new goals and objectives, you might say student work samples, teacher observations. How are you going to collect that data? Can be, what methods you're going to use to collect that data can be used in the PLAAFP. So we have
more questions.
Okay, I'm trying to go forward again. I want to list. let's go with our questions.
Okay, and as you move around a little, sometimes you break up, so I don't know if that
Okay.
it's because you're moving further away from the microphone on your computer.
Okay, how about that? That better?
The FIE is all in the PLAAFP, and there is nothing positive in the PLAAFP to show that he is actually doing well, other than the district test showing his academic performance of average or above average. It sounds like our PLAAFP needs to be revised. Question mark.
Yes. Your PLAAFP should just not be your FIE. The FIE is a standalone document that you've already gotten and reviewed with the art committee is already reviewed. Like I said before, pieces of the PLAAFP can be restated in the pieces of the FIE can be restated in the PLAAFP, but the entire PLAAFP should just not be transcribed in the FIE. Your FIE does not become your PLAAFP. So yes, you can go back to art committee and say, hey, I want updated data, I want updated documentation, and that needs to be included in my PLAAFP.
How would you recommend working in goals for a gifted and talented student who has learning disabilities in reading and difficulties with calculations?
Okay, so first of all, we need to know what their functional performance is. What particular concepts in reading, what particular concepts in math calculations are they having trouble with? So for reading, are they having trouble with decoding? Are they having trouble with blending words? Are they having trouble with, is it just simple addition, subtraction? Is it more mathematical? Is it reading a word problem and then determining what function and what needs to be used from the word problem to do the calculation? You write goals from your students' needs and deficits. So what are their weaknesses? So they're gifted and talented, yes, but they still have academic weaknesses. Those goals come from the academic weaknesses.
Can needs be assessed with one check listed completed by the teacher?
No. Again, variety of sources of data. That checklist, if they're using some kind of checklist, that's just one source of data.
Bethany says, thank you. Our IEP is a hot mess.
Okay.
There's one more question. My school refuses to put the name of the dyslexia program my son is in and was in the previous year in his IEP. Can I insist, or are they correct that programs shouldn't be named?
No, you cannot name programs in the IEP because that puts the district on the line for that. And if they change programs, say for instance, dyslexia program, there's Take Flight, there's MTA. So if they put that your son's doing Take Flight in his IEP and they decide to change the MTA, legally, they are obligated to use Take Flight. So they will say dyslexia program. You cannot put the name of programs. You cannot put the name of equipment. So for instance, a student who uses assistive technology device, it will say low tech or high tech assistive technology device. You will not see iPad in an IEP. You do not name programs, particular names of programs, particular names of equipment, because districts change vendors all the time. And if you put that in an IEP, that district is obligated to use that particular program or vendor.
So this is my question. As you said that, it made me think, so maybe not iPad, but some kind of tablet?
You say high tech device, or you say low tech device, or you say assistive technology device.
But doesn't that also allow the school district to maybe just change something and that may not be as effective?
I mean, you can't necessarily dictate what device they use. That's why there's assistive technology, for instance, in that case, assistive technology evaluation, and they will try different devices. But devices are categorized as low tech or high tech. So you can't say iPad, you can't say Samsung tablet, things like that. You say communication device. So same thing with dyslexia program. You can say it has to be a state approved dyslexia program. Like I said, there's Take Flight, there's MTA. Those are pretty much the two that districts use around here. There's a couple of others, but that's the reason why you have to say state approved, because of dyslexia handbook and the requirements, state approved dyslexia program.
Okay, all right, thanks.
All right. So real quick, to review the PLAAFP checklist. So you in your PLAAFP, you have data, and then they can describe what's going on with your child with their goals and objectives. Then you have your needs. All right. So then the major part that I tell you that gets left out all the time is the impact. We talked about as part of the federal law. They have to describe and tell you how your child's disability impacts their ability to participate in the general education curriculum. And this will be determining whether your child needs specialized instruction, what related services they need, what accommodations. So let me give you an example. For instance, say your child has a specific learning disability, and they have their area of specific learning disability is reading comprehension. They have to explain to you how their learning disability and reading comprehension impacts them in English, how they talk about maybe they cannot read on grade level. They can talk about how it impacts them in math when it comes to reading word problems. They can talk about how it impacts them in science and social studies when it comes to reading the material content for science and social studies. So for instance, a student with a specific learning disability and the area of impact is reading comprehension, that's going to impact them in all subjects. So the PLAAFP should explain to how the student is going to have difficulty accessing the general education curriculum in all subjects, and give examples of how their disability of reading comprehension, specific learning disability with reading comprehension, might impact them accessing the content in each of the classes. So same thing for math. So your student has a specific learning disability in math calculation. Of course, we know that's going to impact their access to general education in math. But when you get up in the higher grades, and especially middle school in science, you use math and science. So their math calculation or their math problem-solving disability is maybe impact them in science class, and they need to explain how that their lack of math skills and their disability in math may impact them in science. So for each subject area, so there's several ways you can do a PLAAFP. At the elementary level, sometimes it's just one big story. It's just paragraph. The students to middle school and high school, they report progress by each subject area. So you might have a part of your PLAAFP that talks about, you'll have about math, you'll have a part that talks about science, social studies, and there might be a part that talks about speech and occupational therapy they needed, and functional and behavior. So for each of those subject areas, all the pieces of the PLAAFP must be there. So you must show current access to the enrolled curriculum, subject area strengths, subject area needs, impact of disability, instructional accommodations, curricular and performance modifications. Let me go back. So the reason why impact of disability is in yellow, sometimes a kid's disability doesn't always. So when you get a PLAAFP and they talk about the different subject areas, you want to make sure each of these components of the PLAAFP is in each subject. So for instance, a student with a math disability, that disability might not impact them in reading. So only in the areas where the disability impacts the student in general education. So I'm seeing, as I go to ARDS with clients, a lot of PLAAFPs are divided up into subject areas. So underneath each subject area, you need to have.
You broke up there when you said underneath subject area, you need to what?
Under each of the subject areas, you need to have the same information for each subject. So for underneath math, you need to have all of these things in the math section of the PLAAFP. Underneath reading, you need to have all these things underneath the reading section of the PLAAFP. And PLAAFPs start to get that way as a student moves into middle school and high school. Sometimes in elementary, they do it that way too. But as a student progresses into really starting grade 6 and above, they report on progress by class. Okay. So they'll talk about how he's doing in biology, which is science. They'll talk about how he's doing in social studies. But under each of those subject areas, this same information needs to be there.
And we're going to go back just a little. We have a question regarding impact, but I missed a question earlier. What's considered low-tech and high-tech technology?
Okay, low-tech is like a communication notebook where it uses PEC systems, the PEC pictures, the PEC exchange system. High-tech devices are assisted technology. That's our iPad.
Things like that. My child has autism. We do not have academic goals yet. Can you describe the impact?
Why do they not have? I'm not understanding why they don't have any academic. What grade?
We'll wait and see if she responds back.
Okay. Okay.
Let me go to the next one. My son's evaluation stated that he doesn't require OT or PT. During the evaluation, they ignored the necessity of OT and PT as he is able to hold the pen or pencil and draw lines. But from our observation, he is lacking the fine and gross motor skills. He doesn't even know how to open or close a door. How could we make them add the OT and PT in the PLAAFP needs?
Okay, so in the current, was he assessed by OT and PT in the current FIE?
It looks like he has some kind of an evaluation. It says they ignored the necessity of the OT and PT.
Okay, so then at that time,
She said no. No, I'm sorry. She answered no.
So there was no OT or PT evaluation piece done as part of the evaluation. If there was not, you can go back to the district and ask for particularly OT and PT evaluation if it was not done the first time. If you disagree with what was done, if it was OT and PT pieces done in the FIE and you disagree with them, you can request the independent evaluation for OT and PT.
And Carla, who was the son about autism, I'm pretty sure that was her question. She said he's in 3rd grade and we have accommodations only right now.
Okay, he's in 3rd grade, so the curriculum that he's working on is the TEKS. That is the general education curriculum. So if he is having difficulties with certain TEKS, he's having difficulties with the curriculum. Those weaknesses should be your goals. So academic goals, they're basically saying he is on grade level.
If they don't have academic goals, that's what they're saying?
That's basically what that means, that he's on grade level. If there's no goals, that means that they're not seeing any deficits. That means he's going to be expected to learn everything in 3rd grade, reading, math, science, all those TEKS that they're supposed to teach at the 3rd grade level in the subjects he is supposed to learn. So they're basically saying he has no academic deficits right now.
No academic deficits. She says we failed our first district level state level test.
Okay. A lot of special ed
Something's not adding up, right?
Yeah, a lot of special ed students fail state assessments, but again, they can go back and look at that state assessment. A state assessment is broken down by which TEKS were tested, which objectives were tested, like I said, which TEKS. And it says, for instance, if they're doing linear equations, I know that's high up, but say they're doing linear equation, there's 3 questions on the test about linear equations, and that student got 0 out of 3, then there must be some deficit with that concept. So you can use your STAR testing and look at your child's results and see what TEKS they did well on, the ones they did not do well on, and those are deficits. Those TEKS can become objectives, goals and objectives.
So same thing with district level tests then, right? Looking at.
Yes, you can look at this.
Also like in categories, so you can say, you know, they missed all of this or they only got one of these 4 concepts right, and then incorporate those into your PLAAFP.
Your goals and objectives. Each district assessment tests certain TEKS. So if there's 11 questions on a math test, each of those questions aligns to a TEK. So if a student, like I said, I'll go back to fractions and say they missed all the questions on fractions, and it'll say the TEK, and then usually the reports will say the TEK, and then it'll say the number of questions that they get 1 out of 5, 0 out of 5. You go back and you particularly look at that TEK and what it's testing, and that tells you right there, that's and that was objectives.
The parent says that the school doesn't seem to be concerned about the fact that they failed the district level test, and she had a meeting with the teacher and they told her to get a tutor.
Okay. No, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. Special ed students passing district level assessments, that's not a big concern for me, and it should not be for parents. How they're doing on their goals and objectives should be the concern. Because your student has a disability, they're not necessarily gonna be on grade level. So I have clients whose children have never passed the state of subject. Some who pass them in certain subjects, and then I have some who don't pass them. Like someone might pass the reading, but they never pass the math. But you can use the data from the state assessments to get your child's strengths and their weaknesses and to develop goals and objectives. That's data. That's just look at that state assessment. Don't look at pass or fail. Look at it as a data source.
And one more question, and then I think we need to move on because you're only about halfway through and we only have about 15 minutes left.
Yes.
If you have a new ARD, say 4 months after the first initial IEP is set to review the IEE data, does the same timeline remain to have the goals met? For example, does the 12th month goal setting change, or does the initial target date remain?
Okay, your IEP is just, say for instance, your first IEP was January 5th, 2017. Your next IEP, your child's have your next ARD meeting by January 4th, 2018. That doesn't change. The goal is extended. An IEP is 1 calendar year. So if you go to ARD and you have a new FIE and some of the goals and objectives need to change, those goals and objectives are only going to go through, say, the January 4th, 2018. They don't go past.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on.
Okay, I hope that answers the question. All right, y'all should have this copies of handouts. This is of a reading PLAAFP. So I'm not going to read it because you have the copy, but in the yellow, those are the different areas, the subject area in the PLAAFP. So we have current access to enroll grade level. It says this student currently participates in modified third curriculum. It talks about his subject area strengths and baselines. Then it talks about area of need, the impact of disability. This talks about what accommodations they're receiving. And then it talks about what modifications to the curriculum. So this is not an entire PLAAFP. This is just the reading section. So under each, like I said in the last slide, we were talking about under each of the subject areas, you still have to include all the pieces of the PLAAFP. So this is an example of a reading section of a PLAAFP. This is for a kindergarten student. So I'll give a second or two and let everybody kind of, if you have the handouts, and look at it on the screen, and you can kind of see how the different pieces are included. So let's, under area of need and impact of disability, it says the student qualifies as a student with a health impaired ADHD, which impacts age appropriate, phonological awareness and decoding skills. He requires multiple redirections for each activity. Example of how it's impacting him in the classroom and impacting his access to general education curriculum. So just remember, for each subject area, all the pieces of the PLAAFP need to be there. So this is an example of a reading one. I don't know why it's not turning like I want it to. What's wrong? Okay. All right. Here is the example of a math one. Same thing. Under each subject area, you have the different pieces at whole grade level. You have the subject area strengths. You have the need and impact of disability. You have the instructional accommodations, and you have the performance. For this student, for area of need, it says student qualifies as a student with OHI and ADHD. His difficulty paying attention and focusing impacts his ability to progress is noted in the reading section because it's the same student. In addition, students' difficulty coping with frustration impacts his ability to persevere through difficult tasks. So they explain how his ADHD impacts him in the general education classroom or in the classroom period. So now these two would be put together in your PLAAFP, and you have a reading section, you would have a math section if they talk about science and social studies, if your student has any OT or PT. But for the academic parts, the PLAAFP needs to basically look like the example here for each section, for each subject area. So I have a few tips for you. It says, when you evaluate your child's PLAAFP from your own perspective, compare what the school has determined. What strengths does your child demonstrate at home or in other places? Because remember, your information is part of the PLAAFP too. How do you and your family help your child build on his strength? Your input and data is also part of the PLAAFP. Make sure your child's PLAAFPs are measurable and objective. It means the data is not influenced by personal opinions. I don't know how much I can stress a teacher's personal feelings and opinions should not be in the PLAAFP. Data should be gathered from different sources, which can include teacher observation. So for example, knowing that your daughter's math skills have improved since last year, or that your daughter's reading skills are grade level is not measurable. So you want the art committee to get you some more specific information. So they might want to say, for example, a student reads at a 3.2 grade level. The child consistently performs a certain task 2 out of 5 times, or attempts 8 out of 10 trials. Just saying that a student's math skills have improved or their reading skills are below grade level, they need to put some measurable numbers to that. Also, make sure your child's class are documented as a statement reflecting current data and are just not checklists. I've seen it where they've taken checklists and put in the data. They've taken the concepts from the TEKS and just listed them in a PLAAFP. That is not measurable. That's not giving you any data. That's just giving you topics that they've discussed in their classes. Another big thing to remember is keep your long-term goals for your child in mind. What do you want them to do after high school? What do you want them to do in middle school? Your IEPs are working toward those goals. Do you want your child to have a job? Do you want them, what are their social skills? So everything in this IEP should be working on the goals and your vision for your child. You should also write a vision statement for your child to read at every one of your ARD meetings. So, and have them document that vision statement in the PLAAFP. So everything in the IEP is working to get your child toward what you see for their vision or for their life, their long-term goals, and their life after high school. So we got a couple more slides. So now that you got your PLAAFP developed and you got a well-written PLAAFP with a lot of data, you've identified your child's strengths, you've identified the needs, that's where you go into your measurable goals. So from the federal law, it says measurable annual goals should be designed to meet 2 statements. It should meet the child's needs that result from the disability and any other of the child's educational needs. Okay, so annual goals are statements to describe what a student can do reasonably within a 12-month period. Goals should not be too hard. These are skills the student should be able to master within a 12-month. It says annual goal area in which a student needs special education services and specially designed instruction. Okay, these goals identify specific areas where a student needs assistance from a special education professional, whether it's a teacher, a paraprofessional. It says the goals address the critical areas identified in the PLAAFP. Okay, that's those needs and weaknesses I keep stressing. Those needs and weaknesses become your goals. So measurable goals have 4 parts to them that we're going to. There's conditions, there's behavior, and there's criteria. A measurable goal includes the behavior or skill that will be measured over a period of time. So your goal, those 4 components: time frame, condition, behavior, and criteria. And we're going to go over each of those. So first, you have their time frame. For example, that is how long the student's going to be working on the goal. So you will see those say in 36 instructional weeks, hard year. That's the time. In 18 instructional weeks. The condition is describe the specific resources that are presented to a child. So for example, in 36 instructional weeks, when presented with reading material on the child's grade level, then you have behavior. That's what you want the student to accomplish. That's measured. So for example, in 36 instructional weeks, given a set of fraction problems with and without common denominators, students will add to solve fraction problems. Then you have your criteria, how they're gonna meet that goal with 75% accuracy on 3 out of 4 trials. So you have your time frame, which is the 36 instructional weeks. You have what they're gonna be given. They're gonna be given fraction problems, or they're gonna be given reading material on what to do. We want them to solve the fraction problems, and then how is they gonna determine their progress? We want them to get 75%, not just one. We want them to be an assessment at least 4 times, and they need to get 75% 3 out of 4 times. So Randy, we don't have any questions over anything on the goals?
Oh, sure we do.
Okay.
My son is in 9th grade, but can only add, subtract, multiply, and divide using single and double-digit numbers with another single single-digit number. I've expressed my concern that his inability to perform multi-step problems, but the school officials just keep pushing him to learn at 9th grade levels and pass the STAR exam. He has told me numerous times that he can't do math. He has autism, ADHD, anxiety, and depressive disorders.
If your student's in 9th grade, he's in an Algebra 1 class. So, correct? If he's in the 9th grade, they're taking Algebra 1. In that class, Algebra 1 teach. They're not focused on that, on basic math calculations. But if that is a need for your child, they have to address a need. A district cannot just not address a student's need or deficit. So you need IEP goals that addresses him adding double digit plus double digit or double digit and single digit. A school district cannot just ignore a student's need. Okay. Academic weakness.
The other is a reference for Partners Resource Network. So I'm going to send that out through the chat box so everybody has this information, that they are federally funded and they are a resource for parents, and offer free webinars, in-person workshops, and so forth. One other comment was back to Carla's child that we were talking about earlier. She is on grade level. We have an IEE. She has written expression disability. The school district said no and will not grant the learning disability. The school will only provide accommodations.
Okay, the thing with the independent education evaluation, it's another source of data. Just because an IEE says a student has a certain disability, the school district does not have to accept that. The is a source of data. The IEE is a source of data. Most of the time when districts pay for an IEE, they're going to use what's in that IEE. I've never gotten a client an IEE and we've gone back to ARD with it and the district says, oh no, we're not going to use it. They paid for that. So they've paid for that information. So I don't understand why they would tell you they're not going to use it. I would go back to ARD and explain again why you think the information of the IEE is important and how it will help your child. So basically, they just threw money away because they paid for the IE. Now they're not using any of the information from it. So they
doesn't make any sense.
They just threw money away. So I would go back to ARD and emphasize you want some of the findings and the information from the IEE in your child's IEP.
That was the last question for now. If you want to go ahead and
okay, we're just going to talk about some goals. So. This is information. These 2 pages are information from the PLAAFPs that were in the PowerPoint. So we're going to do a reading goals, and then we're going to do how you take the information from the PLAAFP and you develop those goals. So if you remember back in that reading PLAAFP, it was about a kindergartner, and he was learning to read, and he was reading sight words. So it says the student needs intensive instructional focus on phonological awareness. He needs segmenting and blending the vowels and consonants. In addition, he's practiced identifying sight words in order to read with greater fluency. So that's the need from the PLAAFP. That's the need that we saw. Now the baseline data from the PLAAFP. It said in February 2011, he was given a DRA and achieved a level 1 developing. It said at this level, the student can read simple sentences with illustrations, so with pictures. The sentences are presented in patterns with 1 or 2 words, so like the car is red, the car is blue. This is the beginning kindergarten level. They said he was presented with 37 sight words, and he correctly identified 4. So from that information, that's the need and the data, come up with measurable goals. So an example of a goal would be by the end of 36 instructional weeks, which is your time frame, when presented with single syllable words, that's the condition, student would distinguish the initial and final vowel sounds, that's the behavior, with 80% accuracy. That's the criteria for measurement. So I use the information, the need, I use the data, and developed an appropriate goal. Another, by the next annual ARD. That's another example of time frame. Your time frame doesn't always need to say by the end of 36 instructional weeks. So by the next annual ARD, that is your time frame. While reading at instructional level, so they'll be given information at instructional level, student will blend beginning, middle, behavior with 80% accuracy in 5 consecutive sessions. That's a goal because it says here in the need, the student has trouble. And then another example of a last goal is in 36 instructional weeks when presented with a kindergarten sight word list, read out of 37 words correctly in 4 out of 5 trials. I took that from the baseline data because the student can only read 4 out of 37. So the goal over the next 12 months is for him to read 15 out of 37. So you take the need that you see, which is the weakness in the PLAAFP, you take the baseline data, that's your starting point for your goals, and you use both of those to develop measurable annual goals. So Randy, I want to see if I have any questions over this slide right here and over how I took the need, the information, the need, and the baseline data and came up with those 3 goals.
In the 36-week instructional, let's see, if the 36-week instructional is long-term goal, okay, let me try to read this again. If the 36-week instructional is long-term goal, what is considered to be a short-term goal? How should it be written?
Okay, so it could be different time frames. You could say in 18 instructional weeks. You could say in 12 instructional weeks. So for instance, let's take the sight words one because it's the easiest one. So it says in 36 instructional weeks, he's going to read 15 out of 37. So let's say in 18 instructional weeks, the student will have 10 out of 37 words read correctly. That could be an objective. So this is the annual goal, and underneath the goal, you can have at least 2 objectives. So let up and say, we're going to say the student's going to read 40 out of 60 sight words in 36 instructional weeks. So in 18 instructional weeks, we could say the student's going to read 15 words. And then we could say in 8 student is going to read 30 sight words. So the objectives just take the goal and break it down.
That was the only question related to that.
Okay, so that was for reading. So now we're going to do the same thing. This is information from that math PLAAFP that we had. So it says the need, it says in order to make progress toward grade level math, the student can do single and multi-step problems He can add 1 and 2 digit addition subtraction problems. It says the student need to increase his ability to solve multiple digit problems. So this student can do single digit problems, but we want to work on multiple digit problems. So that's the need. And then from the data from the PLAAFP, it says he's at basic second grade skills, including place value, greater than, less than, counting, single and double digit calculation, and single step problem solving. It says the students struggle with the first few pages, getting frustrated. It says the exam was at a kindergarten level. It says at this level, the student identifies basic shapes and patterns. So from that need and the data, I have come up with, so by 36 instructional weeks, when given a story and a picture problems involving one-step solutions and 1 and 2 digit numbers, student will solve problems with 75% accuracy. So in this goal here, I put in he will be given story and picture problems because it said that he could solve problems with illustrations. So you want student strength. So for example, this student, his strength was using illustrations and visual cues. So that's why I was given the criteria given to me, the condition given to him is given a story with picture problems. So by the end of 36 instructional weeks, we're given story and picture problems involving one-step solutions and 1 and 2 digit numbers, student will solve problems with 75% accuracy. So this goal includes 1 and 2 digits. He can do 1 digit, so we're using the strength of knowing to work on 2 digit also. Another goal you can get by the end of 36 instructional weeks when given a story and picture problems involving one-step solutions and 1 digit numbers, student will solve problems with 75% accuracy on 8 out of 10 trials. Again, when you see me say, I have an issue where I go into districts and I see that progress will be measured on a goal and a student will just done it 1 time. You want them to do things over a period of time. So that's why you see on my goals, they say 8 out of 10 trials. They might say over 2 consecutive grading periods or 2 consecutive monitoring periods. You want that child to be able to do that goal for a period of time. You just don't want a teacher to measure progress 1 time and say mastered at the beginning of the school year. And then if that student is asked to do that, evaluate that goal at the end of the day, they can't do it. You want to see mastery over a period of time. So you want to see goals that have things like 8 out of 10 trials over a consecutive monitoring period or consecutive grading periods. So then another goal, that's what you can get by the end of 36 instructional weeks. We're giving story and picture problems involving one-step solutions and 2 digit problems. Student will solve problems with 75% accuracy. So if you see this, the top goal was doing 1 and 2 digit numbers. That might be too much for the student. Then I took it and I broke it down. The next goal only works on solving problems with 1 digit numbers. And then the last goal works on solving problems with 2 digit numbers. But you take your information, your need from your PLAAFP, the need of the student, you take where they currently are, their progress, the baseline data, and use both of those to develop measurable goals. And you remember a measurable goal has a time frame, it has your condition that the student will be given, it has the behavior, the criteria, the goal, what you want them to do, and then it has the level of mastery. They're going to be measured. We have a question?
Yeah, we've got 2. Any suggestions for what is an appropriate level of progress before summer and what is appropriate retention level? This determines what is needed over the summer. What is sufficient retention?
Well, you're talking about regression and recoupment, and we talk about that for ESY, extended school year services. And what was the first question again, Randy?
Whoops, some more popped up. Which
Okay.
what is the appropriate level of progress before summer and what's appropriate for retention level?
Okay, the appropriate level of progress is based on your student. That's why this is an individualized education program. There's nothing in the law that says a student has to achieve something by a certain date. Your goals and objectives are based on your student's progress.
A student on grade level and student is on grade level and just needs accommodations. How do you recommend they write goals? Should each subject be written separate, have a separate written goal, or can they combine functional goals for more than one subject?
I would have academic goals, and then I would have separate functional goals. Because you don't want to be trying to measure more than one thing in a goal. It's going to be hard to report progress when you have several different contents or several different topics in one goal. So how do you know if the student mastered that goal? If he masters one of the things, so there's 3 things in a goal. If he masters one, is that goal mastered? If he masters 2 of that 3, is the goal mastered? That's the reason why you don't put multiple, for even in subjects, you don't put multiple content, and you don't put multiple, like 2 or 3 subjects in one goal, because it's hard to measure progress.
That makes sense.
One thing.
One more question, except it's got multiple parts. Can anything be done about the state requirement to learn a second language? My son is limited in his own language and practically nonverbal outside our home. He only speaks in whispers to me using simple sentences. He won't even speak to his own brother or father. Why is another language required of him?
That's part of House Bill 5. You need to look it up. You can look it up, House Bill 5. Your son can be on the foundation plan, eliminated on the foundation plan, but that's the state law for graduation. It's called House Bill 5, and it redid all the graduation plan. If your son is on a foundation plan, I'd have to look it up again for sure. I do not think there's a foreign language requirement in the foundation plan.
Impact statement for behavioral goals should be written how in the PLAAFP?
Okay, they just talk about how their behavior impacts their, so in the classroom. So if a student cannot stay on task, if they have behavior outbursts, they can talk about how their behavior impacts their ability to, about how their ADHD affects them, like staying on task. The student can only stay on task for a few minutes at a time. They can talk about that. They can talk about aggression, how that impacts them accessing the general curriculum. Basically, a student with any behavior issues, ADHD, behavior issues, they're not going to be able to stay on task. So that impacts them getting access to the curriculum. That impacts them finishing work. That impacts them sitting and listening to teachers' instruction.
Okay.
I think I got one more slide.
Yeah, and then we'll take any 1 or 2 last questions and before we close.
Oh, I did. Oh, I hate that I did that. I want to show those. Those are examples of, these are examples of goals that I have written for clients that are currently in students' IEP. All right, here we go. So these are some examples of goals I've written over the last couple of years for students. By the end, so the first one, by the end of 36 instructional weeks, when given a set of fractions with and without common denominator, student will multiply or divide to solve the problems with 75 on 3 out of 4 trials over 2 6-week monitoring periods as measured by curriculum-based probe. This mother wanted to see progress over a period of time. So in this goal, then I broke it down with objectives. By the end of 36 instructional weeks, when given a set of fraction problems with and without common denominator, student will multiply, and then the next objective is student will divide. So that's how you take an annual goal and you can break it down into objectives. And then I'll just read 2 more. By the next annual ARD, when given a multi-step problems and completed examples, student will solve the problem and display the solution in a step-by-step, neat and orderly manner with 90% accuracy. Then the next one I'm gonna read, I think, is behavior. It says, by the next annual ARD, when using coping strategies such as going to her cool down spot or deep breathing, student will refrain from physical aggression of any kind across all environments in the school in 4 to 5 situations as evidenced by observations and event data. So the last 3 on this list, I think, are examples of some behavioral goals and objectives that you can look at, and the top 2 are academic goals and objectives. So if we have any last minute questions.
Yes, ma'am. You can request an LOTE substitution through the ARD committee, and the student can substitute and not take a foreign language. Look up LOTE substitutions on the TEA website.
Yes, there's other classes that they can take to substitute for a foreign language. Sign language is one. I have to think of some other ones. And that's the foreign language.
And back to, I don't want to overlook Carla's comment. This was the child with autism. The school told her that all kids with autism have written expression challenges.
No, FIE, you can do an FIE, and if you have a specific, you can test for specific learning disability, you can test for written expression. They just can't say that. There are assessments that can be done to test.
All right. She says, my PLAAFP is a mess. I'm so sorry.
I am. That's why you use it as an example. Let me put up my contact information.
Yes, ma'am.
So right there, these are some of the references and things I used for the but this is my contact information right here. My phone number, there's my email, there's my website. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram, both of them at Personalized Learning Solutions. If you have any other questions about what's going on, particularly in your PLAAFP, and you want to email me, feel free to do that, and we can have a conversation about it. You can also go to my website, and there's some good articles in my blog about what's going on in the state, because I'm also on the state advisory committee for special ed. There's also some good references and resources on my website.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Shemica. I know that even the years I used to work at our state office for deaf and hard of hearing services, just the whole idea about measurable goals, parents just don't know. You don't know what you don't know. So I think this was very important topic, and I'm glad we've got it recorded, so it'll be posted on our YouTube page. And everyone on the session, I will be emailing again a copy of the materials as well as the CART transcript as soon as I have it. But I'll go ahead and email those materials out today because a couple of people registered late and didn't get those.
Okay, yes.
The last couple of days.
It has all the examples and everything. Like I said, if anybody has any questions about their particular PLAAFP, some issues, like I said, you can send me an email and the number.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us this afternoon or this morning, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.